The scent of whiskey and gunpowder hung in the air as Clara Summers stepped onto the dirt road of Tucumcari, New Mexico territory. The year was 1878, and she had just buried her father 3 days prior, the last of her family, and the only thing tethering her to Boston. The morning sun beat down on her shoulders as she pulled her trunk from the stagecoach, the driver already occupied with other passengers' luggage, her arms strained against the weight, her gloved hands slipping on the leather handle. "Miss, you need a hand with that?" the driver called, barely glancing in her direction. "No, thank you," Clara replied, summoning every ounce of strength in her 5'4" frame. "I can manage." She couldn't manage. The trunk thudded to the ground, sending a small cloud of dust into the air. Clara sighed, tucking a stray auburn curl behind her ear as she surveyed the town that would now be her home. Her uncle's letter had described Tucumcari as a promising settlement with opportunities aplenty, but all she saw were wooden buildings weathered by sun and time, a lone horse hitched to a post outside the saloon, and men whose eyes lingered too long on her traveling dress. "You're gonna break your back before you reach the boardwalk," a deep voice drawled behind her. Clara turned to find herself staring at the chest of a man who stood nearly a foot taller than her. Her gaze traveled upward, past broad shoulders to a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark brown hair curled beneath a worn Stetson, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. "I'll be just fine," she said, straightening her spine and reaching for her trunk again. The stranger watched her struggle for a moment longer before stepping forward. "This ain't Boston, madam. Ain't no shame in accepting help when you need it." Clara paused, surprised. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Your boots, too fine for these parts. And you've got that look about you." "What look might that be?" "Like you're wondering how quick you can catch the next stage out of here." Despite herself, Clara laughed. "Am I that transparent?" To someone who's seen their fair share of newcomers, yes. He nodded toward her trunk. "Now, where are you headed?" Clara hesitated, remembering her father's warnings about strangers, particularly in untamed territories. But something in the man's eyes, a steadiness, perhaps made her relent. "The Brockwell Mercantile. My uncle owns it. Old Samuel Summers?" The stranger's eyebrows rose. "Didn't know he had family back east. He's my father's brother. I'm Clara Summers." The man touched the brim of his hat. "Brock Nolan. Most folks around here call me Nolan." He reached for her trunk, but Clara, operating on instinct and 26 years of self-reliance, moved to grab it at the same time. Their fingers brushed, and she withdrew her hand as if burned. "I ain't used to help," Brock said, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. Clara studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around the street, always alert. "Then it's about time you learned," she said firmly. Brock's head snapped up, eyes narrowing as he realized she'd turned his words back on him. For a moment, they stood in silence, taking each other's measure. "I meant, I ain't used to helping city folk who think they're too good for the likes of us," he clarified, though there was less edge to his voice. "And I meant what I said," Clara replied, smoothing her skirts. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Mr. Nolan, even stubborn cowboys." A reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough?" He lifted her trunk with ease. "Lead the way, Miss Summers." Clara nodded, gathering her reticule and walking toward the mercantile. She could feel the eyes of the townspeople on them as they walked side by side down the main street. A woman in a fine traveling dress and a cowboy whose very presence seemed to command respect, or perhaps fear. "You work for my uncle?" she asked, breaking the silence. Brock shook his head. "Got my own spread about 10 miles north. Come into town every few weeks for supplies. And what brings you to town today?" "Needed some fence wire." He glanced at her. "And now, apparently, I'm in the business of rescuing Eastern ladies from their luggage." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "I didn't ask for your help, Mr. Nolan." "No, madam, you sure didn't." There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "But I reckon you needed it all the same." They reached the mercantile, a 2-story building with Brockwell Mercantile painted in fading letters across the front. A bell jingled as Clara pushed open the door, stepping into the dim interior filled with the scent of coffee, leather, and tobacco. "Uncle Samuel," she called, her voice echoing in the quiet store. A gray-haired man emerged from the back room, spectacles perched on his nose. He squinted at her for a moment before recognition dawned on his face. "Clara? My God, is it really you?" Samuel Summers hurried forward, embracing her with surprising strength for a man of his years. "It's me," she confirmed, returning his embrace. When they separated, she gestured to Brock. "Mr. Nolan was kind enough to help me with my trunk." Samuel's smile faltered slightly as he looked at Brock. "Nolan, didn't expect to see you in town so soon after." He trailed off, clearing his throat. "Well, thank you for helping my niece." Brock set down the trunk, his face expressionless. "Just being neighborly?" "Indeed," Samuel said, an undercurrent in his voice that Clara couldn't interpret. "Well, Clara, let me show you to your room upstairs. I've made up the space above the store for you, just as I promised in my letter." Clara turned to Brock. "Thank you again for your assistance, Mr. Nolan." He touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Summers." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, before he nodded to Samuel and turned to leave. As the door closed behind him, Clara couldn't help but ask, "Is there something between you and Mr. Nolan, Uncle?" Samuel sighed, removing his spectacles to polish them with a handkerchief. "Brock Nolan's a complicated man. Lost his wife and child to fever 3 years back. Since then, he's kept to himself mostly, except when he rides with the law as a deputy when Sheriff Morgan needs extra guns. He seemed guarded." "That's putting it mildly," Samuel replied, replacing his spectacles. "But he's a good man when it counts. Just careful about who he lets close these days." He patted her hand. "Now, let me show you your new home." As Clara followed her uncle up the narrow stairs, she couldn't shake the memory of storm-gray eyes and a voice that carried both strength and an underlying sadness. Whatever his story, Brock Nolan had intrigued her, and in a town as small as Tucumcari, she had a feeling their paths would cross again. The next morning, Clara rose with the sun, determined to make herself useful in her uncle's store. She dressed in a simple blue cotton dress, pinned her hair in a practical knot at the nape of her neck, and descended to the mercantile just as Samuel was opening for the day. "You're an early riser?" he commented, surprised to see her. "Father always said, idle hands make for a restless spirit," Clara replied, tying an apron around her waist. "I'd like to help, if you'll show me what to do." Samuel regarded her with a mixture of pride and concern. "Clara, you don't have to work in the store. Your father's estate is modest at best," she finished for him. "Besides, I didn't come all this way to sit idle. I want to earn my keep and perhaps in time learn enough to be a true partner in the business." Her uncle's eyebrows rose. "A partner? But surely you'll want to marry eventually, have a family of your own." Clara busied herself arranging jars on a nearby shelf. "I was engaged once," she said quietly. "It didn't end well." Samuel seemed to sense her reluctance to elaborate. "Well then, let me show you where everything is." We get busy around midday when the ranchers come in for supplies. The morning passed swiftly as Clara learned the inventory system, prices, and how to operate the register. By noon, the store had seen a steady stream of customers, most of whom regarded her with open curiosity. She met the sheriff, a widower named Edward Morgan, with kind eyes and a silver star pinned to his vest, Mrs. Holloway, who ran the boarding house down the street, and countless ranch hands who tipped their hats and called her Madam with varying degrees of respect. Just after the lunch hour, the bell above the door jingled and Brock Nolan stepped into the store. He paused when he saw Clara behind the counter, surprise flickering across his face before his expression settled back into its usual reserve. "Miss Summers," he said, nodding. "Settling in, I see." "Mr. Nolan," she replied, smoothing her apron. "Yes, Uncle Samuel has been teaching me the ropes. What can I help you with today?" "Came for that fence wire," he said, removing his hat as he approached the counter. "And some coffee, if you have any left." Clara turned to locate the items, aware of his gaze following her movements. "How much wire do you need?" "2 spools should do it. Got some repairs needed on the north pasture." She nodded, gathering the items and placing them on the counter. "Will you be able to manage these alone, or should I offer assistance?" The teasing note in her voice surprised even her. A brief smile touched Brock's lips. "I reckon I can manage, though I'm learning to accept help when offered. Quick study, Clara remarked, tallying his purchases in the ledger. That will be $3.40. Brock counted out the money, his fingers calloused but clean. As he handed her the coins, their hands brushed again, and this time, neither of them pulled away quite so quickly. "Your uncle around?" he asked, glancing toward the back room. "He's gone to the bank," Clara replied. "Is there something I can help with?" Brock hesitated. "Just wanted to let him know I'll be riding out to check on the Miller place. Old man Miller hasn't been to town in over a week, and with those rustlers active in the territory." "Rustlers?" Clara's eyes widened. "Are they dangerous?" "Can be," Brock said simply. "But mostly they're after cattle, not people. Still, folks on isolated homesteads need checking on." "That's very considerate of you." Brock shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what needs doing. Sheriff can't be everywhere at once." Clara hesitated, then asked, "My uncle mentioned you sometimes ride as a deputy." "When needed," he confirmed, replacing his hat. "Not official-like, just an extra gun when trouble comes." There was something in his tone that made Clara wonder about the kind of trouble he'd faced. "Have you lived in Tucumcari long?" "Going on 5 years now," Brock replied, gathering his purchases. "Came from Texas originally." "And your ranch." "It ain't much," he cut in, suddenly guarded again. "Just enough land to run a small herd. Nothing fancy like those big outfits further north." Clara sensed she'd touched on a sensitive subject. "I didn't mean to pry." Brock's expression softened slightly. "No offense taken. Just not used to talking about myself much." "Well, perhaps that's something else you could learn," she suggested gently. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. The bell jangled as the door opened, breaking the moment. Sheriff Morgan entered, his expression grave. "Nolan," he said with a nod. "Good, you're here." Got word from a traveler that the Miller place looked deserted. Smoke from the chimney, but no sign of Jacob himself. Brock's demeanor changed instantly. All business. "I was just telling Miss Summers I was heading out there today." "I'll ride with you," the sheriff decided. "If those rustlers have moved from stealing cattle to harming settlers." "Let me get my gear," Brock said, already moving toward the door. He paused, glancing back at Clara. "Tell your uncle we'll report back by nightfall." Before she could respond, both men were gone, leaving her with an inexplicable sense of unease. She'd been in Tucumcari barely 24 hours and already felt the undercurrents of danger that existed beyond the town's borders. Samuel returned shortly after, concerned when Clara relayed the news about the Miller homestead. "Jacob Miller's a good man," he said, shaking his head. "Lives alone since his wife died last winter. I hope nothing's happened to him." "Do rustlers often cause trouble around here?" Clara asked. Samuel sighed, leaning against the counter. "It comes in waves. This latest bunch has been bold, taking cattle in broad daylight. Sheriff thinks they might be the same gang that's been hitting ranches across the territory. And Brock Nolan, he helps catch them?" "When he can," Samuel confirmed. "Nolan knows this territory better than most. Used to be a Texas Ranger before he came here and bought his spread." This new information surprised Clara. "A Ranger? He didn't mention that." Samuel's expression grew somber. "Nolan doesn't talk much about his past. Lost his wife and baby daughter to fever not long after settling here. Hit him hard. He's been a different man since then." "That's terrible," Clara whispered, thinking of the reserved man who'd helped her with her trunk. His grief suddenly made more sense. "Yes, it is," Samuel agreed. For a while, folks worried he might drink himself into an early grave. But then the sheriff asked for his help tracking some outlaws, and something changed. He doesn't exactly embrace life, but he's found purpose in protecting the territory. Clara thought about this as she continued her work that afternoon. By closing time, there had been no word from the sheriff or Brock. She found herself glancing repeatedly at the door, hoping for news. "They might not make it back tonight," Samuel told her, noting her concern. "If there's trouble, they'll handle it and return when they can." "I'm just worried about Mr. Miller," Clara said, not entirely truthfully. Samuel gave her a knowing look, but didn't press the matter. "Come on, I'll fix us some supper upstairs." They had just finished their meal when heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs leading to the living quarters above the store. Samuel opened the door to find Sheriff Morgan, his expression grim. "Edward, come in," Samuel said, stepping aside. "Any news of Jacob?" "Not good, I'm afraid," the sheriff replied, removing his hat. "Found him in his barn, been shot. Rustlers took his cattle and most of his horses." Clara gasped. "Is he?" "He's alive, but barely," Sheriff Morgan confirmed. "Nolan's bringing him in now on a travois. Doc Jenkins is waiting at his office." "What happened?" Samuel asked, pouring the sheriff a cup of coffee. "Near as we can figure, Jacob surprised them while they were stealing his stock, shot him, and left him for dead. Must have happened 3, maybe 4 days ago. He managed to crawl to the barn, had some water stored there. It's the only thing that kept him alive." "Those bastards," Samuel muttered. "Pardon my language." "Clara." Clara barely heard him, her mind on the injured man being transported into town. "Is there anything I can do to help?" The sheriff considered her offer. "Doc might need extra hands. His wife usually assists, but she's visiting family in Santa Fe." "I've had some training," Clara said quickly. "I volunteered at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston for 2 years. Both men looked at her with surprise. "That might be useful," the sheriff acknowledged. "If you're sure you're up for it. Gunshot wounds ain't pretty." "I've seen worse," Clara said, already reaching for her shawl. "Uncle, do we have any clean linens to spare? And perhaps some of that whiskey from behind the counter?" Samuel nodded, impressed by her practical thinking. "I'll gather some supplies and meet you at the doctor's." The sheriff led Clara through the quiet streets to a small whitewashed building with a sign that read, "Dr. Elias Jenkins, Physician and Surgeon." Inside, an elderly man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard was arranging instruments on a metal tray. "Doc, this is Samuel's niece, Clara Summers," Sheriff Morgan introduced her. "Says she's had some medical training back east. Thought she might be able to help." The doctor assessed her with sharp blue eyes. "Ever assisted with a gunshot wound, Miss Summers?" "3 times, Clara replied truthfully. "Though it's been a while." "Better than nothing," the doctor decided. "Wash up over there. We'll need to work fast once Nolan gets here with Miller." Clara did as instructed, rolling up her sleeves and scrubbing her hands thoroughly at the basin. As she was drying them on a clean towel, the door burst open, and Brock entered, carrying one end of a makeshift stretcher. Another man she didn't recognize held the other end. Between them lay an elderly man, his face ashen beneath a weathered tan, his shirt dark with dried blood. Clara's training immediately took over, as she hurried to help transfer the injured man to the examination table. "Bullet's still in him," Brock reported tersely. "Left side, below the ribs. He's been drifting in and out of consciousness." Dr. Jenkins nodded, already cutting away the blood-soaked shirt. "Miss Summers, press here while I prepare the chloroform." Clara applied pressure to the wound, trying not to flinch at the old man's groan of pain. She looked up to find Brock watching her with surprise, and something that might have been admiration. "You have steady hands," he observed quietly. "Comes with practice," she replied, focusing on her task. "Could you hand me that clean cloth?" For the next 2 hours, Clara assisted as Dr. Jenkins extracted the bullet, cleaned the wound, and stitched Jacob Miller back together. Throughout the procedure, she remained calm and efficient, handing instruments, providing water, and monitoring the patient's breathing as the doctor worked. Brock stayed the entire time, a silent presence in the corner of the room. When it was finally over, Dr. Jenkins straightened with a sigh. "He's got a fighting chance now," the elderly doctor pronounced. "Miss Summers, your assistance was invaluable." "Thank you," Clara said, exhaustion suddenly washing over her. She glanced at the clock on the wall, surprised to find it was well past midnight. "I'll walk you back to the mercantile," Brock offered, stepping forward. Clara nodded gratefully. "I'd appreciate that. Uncle Samuel must be worried." They found Samuel dozing in a chair by the doctor's front desk. He startled awake when they emerged from the surgery room. "Jacob?" he asked immediately. "Holding on," Brock answered. "Doc says he's got a chance, thanks in part to your niece." Samuel looked at Clara with newfound respect. "You never mentioned your medical training in your letters." "It didn't seem important at the time," Clara said, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look, with blood on her apron and strands of hair escaping her once neat bun. "I'd say it was mighty important tonight," Brock remarked. "Miller might not have made it otherwise. Outside, the night air was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead in a way Clara had never seen in Boston. The three walked in companionable silence back to the mercantile, the events of the day weighing heavily on them all. At the store, Samuel unlocked the door, then turned to Brock. "Will you stay for a drink? I think we could all use one after tonight." Brock hesitated, then nodded. "Just one. Need to check on my horse before heading back to the ranch." Upstairs in the living quarters, Samuel poured 3 glasses of whiskey. Clara accepted hers with a murmured thanks, though she rarely drank spirits. "To Jacob Miller," Samuel said, raising his glass. "May he recover fully." They drank, Clara wincing slightly at the burn. When she looked up, Brock was watching her with that same hint of amusement she'd seen before. "Not much for whiskey?" he asked. "Not typically," she admitted, "though after tonight, I can see its appeal." "You did good work back there," Brock said, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity that touched her. "Most women I know would have fainted at the sight of all that blood." "I'm not most women, Mr. Nolan." "No," he agreed, holding her gaze. "You certainly are not." The moment stretched between them, broken only when Samuel cleared his throat. "Any leads on who might have done this?" he asked Brock. Brock set down his glass. "Found tracks heading southwest. Sheriff's organizing a posse for First Light. Asked if I'd lead it, seeing as I know the territory." "You'll go after them?" Clara couldn't keep the concern from her voice. "It's what I do," Brock said simply. "Can't let men like that think they can shoot down honest folk and get away with it." "How long will you be gone?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop herself. Brock's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Hard to say. Could be days, could be longer. Depends on whether they're headed for the border." "Well, you be careful," Samuel said firmly. "Those men have already shown they won't hesitate to kill." Brock drained his glass and stood. "I always am. Thank you for the drink." At the door, he paused, turning back to Clara. "Miss Summers, if you're still at the store tomorrow, before we ride out, the posse could use some supplies, jerky, coffee, that sort of thing." "Of course," Clara said, understanding this was his way of ensuring they would see each other again before he left. "I'll have everything ready first thing." After Brock departed, Samuel studied his niece thoughtfully. "He likes you," he observed. Clara felt her cheeks warm. "He's just being courteous." "Brock Nolan doesn't do anything out of mere courtesy," Samuel said with a small smile. "Trust me on that." Clara changed the subject, but as she prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking of gray eyes and the quiet strength of the man who possessed them. She told herself it was natural to be concerned about someone riding into danger, but deep down, she knew there was more to it than that. The next morning, Clara was at the store before dawn, preparing supplies for the posse. She packed coffee, jerky, hardtack, and other essentials that would sustain men on the trail. She had just finished when the bell above the door jangled. Ann Brock entered, followed by Sheriff Morgan and 4 other men. "Morning, Miss Summers," the sheriff greeted her. "Your uncle said you'd have some supplies ready for us." "Yes, everything's here," Clara said, gesturing to the bundles on the counter. As the men divided the supplies among their saddlebags, Clara found herself standing next to Brock. "How's Mr. Miller this morning?" she asked quietly. "Still alive," Brock replied. "Doc says that's a good sign. He was lucid enough to describe one of the men who shot him, fellow with a scar across his cheek." "Be careful," Clara said, impulsively touching his arm. "These men sound dangerous." Brock looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then met her eyes. "I've dealt with worse." "Still," Clara insisted, "I'd hate for Dr. Jenkins to have another patient on his hands." A ghost of a smile touched Brock's lips. "Would you now?" Before Clara could respond, the sheriff called for Brock. "Time to mount up, Nolan. Want to catch their trail while it's fresh." Brock nodded, then turned back to Clara. "I'll be back," he said simply. "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Nolan." As the posse rode out of town, Clara stood in the doorway of the mercantile, watching until they disappeared from view. She told herself she was concerned for all of them, but knew it wasn't entirely true. In just 2 days, Brock Nolan had somehow become important to her in a way she hadn't anticipated. The days that followed settled into a routine for Clara. She worked in the store, visited Jacob Miller at the doctor's office as he slowly regained his strength, and tried not to worry about the posse tracking the rustlers. News was scarce, though occasionally riders would bring word that the posse had been spotted in various locations, always moving southwest. A week after they had departed, Clara was closing the store for the evening when the door opened, admitting a gust of cool air and Sheriff Morgan, his face lined with exhaustion. "Sheriff," Clara said, setting aside the broom she'd been using. "You're back." "Just got in," he confirmed, removing his hat. "Thought you and Samuel would want to know." Clara's heart raced. "And the others? Mr. Nolan?" "Most are back," the sheriff said carefully. "Nolan and 2 others are bringing in the prisoners. They'll be a day behind us." Relief flooded through her. "You caught the rustlers?" "3 of them," Sheriff Morgan confirmed. "Found them holed up in an abandoned mine near the border. There was a fight. We lost one man, Tom Wilson, from the Bailey Ranch. 2 of the rustlers were killed resisting arrest." "I'm sorry about Mr. Wilson," Clara said sincerely. "When do you expect Mr. Nolan and the others to return?" "Tomorrow, likely," the sheriff said, studying her with knowing eyes. "Nolan took a bullet graze to the arm, but he's too stubborn to let Doc Jenkins look at it until the prisoners are safely in jail." Clara's breath caught. "He's injured?" "Nothing serious," the sheriff assured her. "Like I said, just a graze. Man's got more lives than a cat." He replaced his hat. "Well, I should get home. Been in the saddle most of a week." After he left, Clara found herself unable to focus on her closing tasks. Brock was alive, but wounded. He was coming back tomorrow. The mix of relief and anticipation was unsettling. That night, she slept fitfully, waking at every sound. By morning, she was on edge, jumping each time the store's bell rang. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that she heard the commotion outside. Voices raised in greeting, horses' hooves on packed dirt. Clara forced herself to remain behind the counter as Samuel went to the door. From where she stood, she could see 3 riders escorting 2 men with their hands bound, followed by a small crowd of townspeople. Sheriff Morgan emerged from his office, directing the prisoners inside. And then, through the open door, she saw him. Brock sat tall in his saddle, despite the dust covering his clothes and the visible fatigue in his posture. His left arm was bound with a makeshift bandage, a spot of red visible through the cloth. Before she could think better of it, Clara untied her apron and hurried outside. She reached him just as he was dismounting, wincing slightly as the movement jarred his injured arm. "Mr. Nolan," she said, stopping a few feet away, suddenly aware of the eyes watching them. Brock turned, surprise and something warmer flickering in his eyes when he saw her. "Miss Summers. Sheriff Morgan mentioned you were injured." He glanced at his arm dismissively. "It's nothing. Bullet barely touched me." "Even so, it should be properly cleaned and dressed," Clara insisted. "Infection is nothing to trifle with." Brock studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Suppose you're right, after I see to my horse." "I can help with that," a young boy offered, stepping forward eagerly. "Pa says I'm to earn my keep at the livery now that I'm 12. Brock hesitated, then handed the reins to the boy. "Treat him well. He's earned his rest." With his horse taken care of, Brock had no further excuse. Clara led him into the mercantile, where Samuel greeted him with a firm handshake and an offer of whiskey. "Later, perhaps," Brock said, glancing at Clara. "Your niece seems determined to play doctor first." "And rightly so," Samuel agreed. "Clara, use the back room. I'll mind the store." In the private space behind the shop, Clara gathered clean water, cloths, and the medical supplies she'd asked her uncle to order after helping with Jacob Miller. Brock sat on a wooden chair, removing his hat and placing it on the table beside him. "You'll need to take off your shirt," Clara said, her voice carefully professional. Brock's eyebrows rose slightly, but he complied, unbuttoning his shirt with his good arm. Clara helped him ease it off his injured side, her fingers brushing against skin that was warm despite his exhaustion. The wound was indeed a graze, but deeper than she'd expected, a furrow along the outside of his upper arm that had bled significantly before being bandaged. "When did this happen?" she asked, carefully removing the dirty bandage. 3 days ago," Brock answered, watching her work. "During the shootout at the mine." Clara clicked her tongue disapprovingly. 3 days with nothing but this rag? You're fortunate it's not infected already." "Been too busy to worry about it," Brock said, then inhaled sharply as she began cleaning the wound. "I'm sorry," Clara murmured, working as gently as possible. "This will sting." "I've had worse," Brock said, though his jaw was tight with pain. They fell silent as Clara continued her ministrations, cleaning the wound thoroughly before applying a salve and wrapping it with clean bandages. She was acutely aware of his proximity, of the steady rise and fall of his chest, of the scars that marked his torso, testaments to a life lived hard. "You've done this before," Brock observed, breaking the silence. "As I said, I had some training in Boston," Clara replied, focusing on securing the bandage. "Though my father never approved, he thought it unseemly for a lady to work in a hospital." "Why'd you do it then?" Clara considered the question. "After my mother died, I wanted to understand. The doctors couldn't save her, and I thought, perhaps if I learned enough, I could help save someone else." She tied off the bandage. "There, that should heal well now, as long as you keep it clean and don't reopen it." Brock flexed his arm experimentally. "Feels better already. Thank you." "You're welcome." Clara busied herself with putting away the supplies, suddenly shy under his steady gaze. "The sheriff said you caught 3 of the rustlers?" "Yes," Brock confirmed, reaching for his shirt. "The 2 we brought in will stand trial. The other won't bother anyone again." There was a grimness to his tone that reminded Clara of the dangerous man beneath the civil exterior. "And the one who shot Mr. Miller?" "He was one of the 2 who didn't make it," Brock said flatly. "He drew on me. It was him or me." Clara nodded, understanding the harsh realities of justice in this territory. "I'm glad you're the one who came back." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Brock stood, towering over her in the small room. "I told you I would." "Yes," Clara said softly. "You did." For a moment, she thought he might say more, might close the distance between them. Instead, he cleared his throat and reached for his hat. "I should report to the sheriff," he said. "Thank you again for tending to my arm." "Any time," Clara replied, then flushed at her own words. "That is, I hope you won't need such services often, but if you do—" A smile touched Brock's lips, transforming his face. "I'll know where to come." After he left, Clara remained in the back room for several minutes, collecting herself. She was a grown woman of 26, not some schoolgirl with her first infatuation. Yet something about Brock Nolan affected her in a way no man ever had, not even her former fiancé back in Boston. That evening, as she helped her uncle close the store, Samuel finally asked the question she'd been dreading. "You've taken quite an interest in Nolan." Clara pushed the comment aside. "I've taken an interest in many people since arriving here." "Not like this," Samuel said gently. "Clara, I don't mean to pry, but Nolan's not an easy man. Whatever happened with his wife and child left him scarred in ways that aren't visible." "I'm merely being friendly," Clara insisted. "This is my home now. It makes sense to know my neighbors." Samuel looked unconvinced, but let the matter drop. "Speaking of neighbors, Mrs. Holloway is hosting a social on Saturday evening. She specifically asked me to bring you. Says it's high time you met everyone properly." Clara nodded, grateful for the change of subject. "That sounds lovely." The next few days passed without Clara seeing Brock again. She heard he'd returned to his ranch after giving testimony against the captured rustlers. Life in Tucumcari continued. Customers came and went. Jacob Miller improved enough to receive visitors, and Clara found herself gradually becoming part of the community. Saturday evening arrived, and Clara dressed with more care than usual, selecting a blue dress that her father had always said matched her eyes. She arranged her auburn hair in a style that was fashionable yet practical, and even added a touch of rosewater to her wrists. "You look lovely," Samuel commented as they walked to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. "The young men of Tucumcari won't know what hit them," Clara laughed, linking her arm through his. "I'm hardly looking to cause a sensation, Uncle." "Nevertheless, I expect you will," Samuel said with a fond smile. Mrs. Holloway's parlor was already crowded when they arrived, filled with what seemed like half the town's population. Clara was introduced to so many people that the names began to blur together, though she did her best to remember each one. The evening progressed pleasantly with music from a piano played by Mrs. Holloway's daughter. refreshments served on the best china, and conversation that ranged from local gossip to news from back east. Clara was in the middle of a discussion about Boston's cultural attractions with the schoolteacher, Miss Whitman, when a stir at the door caught her attention. Brock Nolan stood in the entrance, looking uncomfortable in clean clothes that somehow seemed too confining for his frame. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He nodded to the room in general, accepting a cup of punch from Mrs. Holloway with murmured thanks. "Well, this is a surprise," Miss Whitman remarked. "Mr. Nolan rarely attends social gatherings." "Indeed?" Clara said, trying to sound merely curious. "Oh, yes, he's quite the recluse since his tragedy," the teacher continued, lowering her voice. "I'm surprised to see him here tonight." Before Clara could respond, Sheriff Morgan approached Brock and engaged him in conversation. She tried to focus on Miss Whitman's words, but found her gaze continually drawn to the tall figure across the room. Eventually, there was a call for music and dancing. Several couples took to the small, cleared area in the center of the room as Mrs. Holloway's daughter began playing a lively tune. Clara watched from the sidelines, tapping her foot in time with the music. "Do you dance, Miss Summers?" a voice asked beside her. She turned to find Brock standing closer than she'd expected, his gray eyes intent on her face. "I do," she replied, her heart quickening, "though I'm not familiar with the dances of the territory." "They're simple enough," Brock said, offering his hand. "If you'd care to learn." Clara placed her hand in his, noting that he'd removed the bandage from his arm. "How was your injury?" "Healing well," he said, as he led her to the dance floor. "Had a good doctor." The dance was indeed simple, a series of turns and steps that brought them together and apart in a pattern Clara quickly mastered. Brock moved with surprising grace for such a large man, guiding her confidently through the figures of the dance. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight," Clara admitted during a moment when the dance brought them close. "Didn't expect to come," Brock replied honestly, "but I heard you'd be here." The simple statement sent warmth spreading through Clara's chest. "You came because of me?" "Seemed a better reason than most," he said, his expression softening. "You look beautiful, Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her breath catch. "Thank you, Brock." They completed the dance in silence, though it was a comfortable one, filled with unspoken understanding. When the music ended, Brock led her to the porch outside, away from the heat and noise of the gathering. The night was clear, stars strewn across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Clara drew her shawl around her shoulders against the slight chill. "Different from Boston," Brock observed, following her gaze upward. "Everything is different here," Clara agreed. "But I'm beginning to think that's not a bad thing." Brock turned to face her, his expression serious. "Why did you really come to Tucumcari, Clara? A woman with your education, your background there, must have been opportunities for you in Boston." Clara considered how much to tell him, then decided on the truth. "I was engaged, as I mentioned to my uncle, to a doctor at the hospital where I volunteered. I thought we shared the same values, the same vision for the future." She paused, the memory still painful, despite the months that had passed. "I discovered he was involved with another woman, a nurse at the hospital. When I confronted him, he told me he'd never intended to marry me. He only wanted my father's connections to advance his career." "Fool," Brock said quietly. Clara smiled sadly. "The worst part was that I wasn't even heartbroken. Hurt and angry, yes, but not devastated. It made me realize I'd never truly loved him. I was simply following the path expected of me." She looked out at the darkened street. "When my father died shortly after, I found myself at a crossroads. Uncle Samuel had been writing for years about Tucumcari, about the freedom of the West. I decided I wanted that freedom for myself." "And have you found it?" Brock asked. "I believe I'm beginning to," Clara replied, meeting his gaze. "What about you? Will you ever tell me your story?" Brock was silent for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I was a ranger in Texas, good at my job, too good maybe. Made enemies. One of them tracked me to my home while I was away on patrol." His hands gripped the porch railing, knuckles white. "My wife, Eliza, and our daughter Sarah were alone. By the time I got back, the house was burning. I couldn't I couldn't save them. Brock, I'm so sorry, Clara whispered, instinctively reaching for his hand. He allowed the contact, his fingers curling around hers. After that, I hunted down the man responsible. Won't burden you with those details. Then I drifted, ended up here, bought land nobody wanted, built something from nothing. He looked down at their joined hands. Wasn't living, though, just existing. And now? Clara asked softly. Brock's eyes met hers, vulnerability and hope mingling in their depths. Now, I'm not so sure anymore. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. From inside, the music changed to a slower melody, drifting through the open windows. Would you care for another dance? Brock asked, not releasing her hand. Clara nodded, stepping into his arms as they began to sway gently on the porch, removed from the watching eyes inside. His hand at her waist was warm and steady, his movements sure despite the informal setting. People will talk, Clara murmured, though she made no move to pull away. Let them, Brock replied, his voice a rumble she could feel through his chest. Unless you mind. I don't, Clara said truthfully. I've never much cared for others' opinions. Another way we're alike, Brock observed, the hint of a smile touching his lips. They continued their dance long after the song inside had ended, moving to a rhythm of their own making. When they finally stopped, they remained close, neither wanting to break the spell of the moment. I should take you back inside, Brock said reluctantly. Your uncle will be wondering where you've gone. A few more minutes, Clara requested, gazing up at him. It's peaceful out here. Brock nodded, releasing her from the dance, but keeping one of her hands in his as they moved to the porch railing. They stood side by side, looking out at the sleeping town, comfortable in each other's presence. I'd like to show you my ranch sometime, Brock said suddenly. If you're interested. Clara turned to him, surprised and pleased by the invitation. I'd like that very much. It's nothing fancy, he warned again. Not what you're used to. I'm not the same person I was in Boston, Clara reminded him. And I think you'll find I'm adaptable. Brock's expression softened as he looked down at her. I'm beginning to see that. Inside, voices were raised in farewell as the gathering began to break up. Clara knew their time alone was coming to an end. When? She asked simply. Sunday after next, Brock suggested. I could bring the wagon to town, take you out for the day, if your uncle approves. Clara smiled. I'll speak with him, though I'm hardly a young girl needing permission. Still, Brock said seriously, I respect Samuel. Wouldn't want to cause talk that might harm your reputation. His consideration touched her. Sunday after next sounds perfect. They returned inside just as Samuel was looking for her. If he noticed their clasped hands or the slight flush on Clara's cheeks, he made no comment, merely including Brock in their goodbyes to their hostess. As they walked home, Samuel finally spoke. So, Nolan has taken an interest. Clara nodded, not bothering to deny it. He's invited me to see his ranch the Sunday after next. With your blessing, of course. Samuel considered this. He's a good man, Clara. Complicated, as I said, but honorable. If you care for him, you have my blessing. Thank you, Uncle, Clara said, squeezing his arm gratefully. I believe I do care for him, more than I expected to. Just be patient with him, Samuel advised. He's been alone a long time. May take him a while to remember how to open his heart fully. Clara thought of the vulnerability she'd glimpsed in Brock's eyes on the porch, the way his hand had held hers as if it were something precious. Some things are worth waiting for, she said softly. The days leading up to their outing passed slowly for Clara. She saw Brock briefly when he came to the store for supplies, their interactions now charged with awareness and anticipation. Word had clearly spread about their dance at Mrs. Holloway's, as Clara noticed knowing looks and whispers when they spoke. On the appointed Sunday, Clara rose early, dressing in a practical riding skirt and jacket, her hair braided and pinned to withstand the journey. She packed a basket of food, remembering Brock's offhand comment about not being much of a cook. Brock arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, driving a well-maintained wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He dressed with care as well, his usual worn clothing replaced by a clean shirt and newer denim trousers. Morning, he greeted her, jumping down to help with her basket. You look ready for the trail. I am, Clara confirmed, accepting his hand as she climbed into the wagon. I've been looking forward to this. Samuel came out to see them off, exchanging pleasantries with Brock before stepping back with a wave. "Have her back before dark," he called, though his tone was light. "Yes, sir," Brock replied, taking the reins. As they left town behind, Clara felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced since arriving in Tucumcari. The open landscape stretched around them, painted in shades of gold and green under the clear blue sky. "It's beautiful," she said, taking in the vista. "Different from what I imagined, but beautiful in its own way." "Takes some getting used to," Brock acknowledged. "All this space. First time I saw it, I thought I'd never feel closed in again." "Do you miss Texas?" Clara asked. Brock considered the question. "Miss some parts, the Gulf Coast, the pine forests in the east. But there were too many ghosts there." Clara nodded, understanding. "And here? Here I've made peace with my ghosts," Brock said quietly. "Mostly. They traveled for nearly an hour, the terrain gradually changing as they moved north of town. Brock pointed out landmarks, naming creeks and distant mesas, sharing stories of the land and its history. Finally, they crested a small rise, and Brock reined in the horses. "There it is," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Nolan Ranch." Below them lay a valley, greener than the surrounding countryside, thanks to a creek that wound through it. A modest house stood near a cluster of outbuildings, with corrals and a small barn nearby. In the distance, cattle grazed on the open range, dark dots against the landscape. "It's lovely," Clara said sincerely. "How much land do you have?" 640 acres, Brock replied. "Not large by some standards, but enough for my herd. The creek doesn't dry up, even in summer, which makes it valuable." As they approached the house, Clara noticed the care that had gone into its construction. Though simple, it was solid, with a covered porch across the front and windows that would catch both morning and afternoon light. Brock helped her down from the wagon, suddenly looking uncertain. "It's not much compared to what you're used to." "It's a home," Clara said warmly. "A real one. That's what matters." Relief crossed his features as he led her inside. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace along one wall, a table and chairs near the small kitchen area, and a comfortable-looking chair beside a bookshelf that surprised Clara with its contents. "You read Shakespeare?" she asked, noting the volume of collected works among the books. "Among other things," Brock confirmed. "Not much else to do on winter nights." A door led to what Clara presumed was the bedroom, though Brock didn't offer a tour of that space. Instead, he showed her the root cellar, the smokehouse, and the barn where he kept his horses. "This is Storm," he said, introducing a magnificent black gelding who nickered softly at his approach. "Best cow horse I've ever had." Clara offered her hand to the horse, who sniffed it curiously before allowing her to stroke his nose. "He's beautiful. Do you have others?" "3 more, Brock said, "and a couple of young ones I'm training." "Do you ride?" "Not well," Clara admitted. "We had carriage horses in Boston, but I rarely had the opportunity to learn properly." "I could teach you if you'd like," Brock offered. "Got a gentle mare that would suit a beginner." "I'd like that," Clara said, pleased by the implicit promise of future visits. They returned to the house for lunch, enjoying the food Clara had brought along with coffee Brock prepared on his stove. The conversation flowed easily between them, moving from books they had read to stories of Brock's cattle drives and Clara's journey west. After the meal, Brock suggested they walk down to the creek. The day had warmed considerably, and the shade of the cottonwood trees along the water was welcome. They found a spot where the bank formed a natural seat, spreading a blanket Brock had brought from the house. "I come here sometimes in the evenings," Brock said, as they sat side by side. "Good place to think." "I can see why," Clara agreed, watching the play of light on the water. "It's peaceful." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of the water and birds calling in the distance. After a while, Brock spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Been thinking about what you said that night at Mrs. Holloway's. About finding freedom here." "Yes. I came here looking for the same thing," Brock admitted. "Thought if I kept to myself, built something with my own hands, I could find peace." He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his fingers. It helped, for a while, but there was still something missing. Clara waited, sensing he had more to say. When Sheriff Morgan asked me to help track those outlaws that first time, I thought it was just a favor to an old friend. But it gave me purpose again, reminded me that I was still part of something larger. He glanced at her. And then you arrived, and suddenly I found myself thinking beyond the next day, the next week. Clara's heart quickened at his words. And what do you think about? Brock set the stone aside and turned to face her fully. Things I haven't allowed myself to consider in a long time. A future that might include more than just survival. His voice dropped lower. Someone to share it with. Clara found herself unable to look away from the intensity in his eyes. Brock, I know it's fast, he said quickly. Know we've only known each other a short while, but there's something between us, Clara. Something I haven't felt since... ever, maybe. I feel it too, Clara admitted softly. I didn't expect to find someone like you here. Someone like me? A hint of wariness entered his expression. A widowed rancher with more scars than prospects? Clara shook her head, reaching out to touch his face gently. A man of honor, someone who protects others without seeking recognition, who reads Shakespeare by lamplight and builds a home with his own hands, who dances under the stars and speaks honestly about his fears. Brock caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his cheek before turning to place a kiss in her palm. The touch sent a tremor through Clara, a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. I'm not a perfect man, he said roughly. Made my share of mistakes, but I promise you, this I'll always be honest with you, always respect you, and if you give me the chance, I'll do everything in my power to make you happy. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the simple sincerity of his words. That sounds remarkably like a proposal, Mr. Nolan. A smile touched his lips. Not yet. When I propose, you'll know it. But consider this, a declaration of intent. Then I accept your declaration, Clara said softly, and offer one of my own. I care for you, Brock Nolan, more than I thought possible in so short a time. Brock's hand came up to cradle her face, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheek. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned forward until his lips met hers, in a kiss as gentle as it was profound. Clara had been kissed before, but never like this, never, with such tenderness and restrained passion. Her hands moved to his shoulders as she returned the kiss, feeling as though something long dormant within her had finally awakened. When they finally parted, Brock rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. Been wanting to do that since I saw you standing in the street with that trunk, he confessed. Clara laughed softly. Even when I was being stubborn? Especially then, Brock replied, his eyes crinkling with amusement. Knew right then you weren't like any woman I'd met before. They remained by the creek until the shadows lengthened, talking, sharing occasional kisses, and simply enjoying each other's company. When it was time to return to town, Clara felt a reluctance to leave that surprised her with its intensity. I'll come to town next Saturday, Brock promised as they drove back toward Tucumcari. Maybe we could have dinner at the hotel? They do a decent meal. I'd like that, Clara agreed. And perhaps you could join us for Sunday dinner afterward. Uncle Samuel would enjoy the company, I think. It's a plan, Brock said, reaching over to take her hand. As promised, Brock returned Clara to the mercantile before dark, though only just. Samuel was waiting on the porch, pretending to read a newspaper, though his frequent glances down the road betrayed his concern. Right on time, he commented as Brock helped Clara down from the wagon. Yes, sir, Brock replied, his tone respectful. Had a fine day. Samuel's eyes moved between them, noting their clasped hands and the happiness evident on both their faces. I can see that, he said dryly. Will you stay for supper, Nolan? Thank you, but I should get back to the ranch, Brock declined. Got animals to tend to. He turned to Clara. Saturday? Saturday, she confirmed, reluctantly releasing his hand. After Brock had driven away, Samuel led Clara inside. I take it the outing was successful? He asked mildly. Clara smiled, unable to contain her happiness. Very. He's coming to town on Saturday for dinner, and I've invited him to join us on Sunday as well. Moving quickly, aren't you? Samuel observed, though there was no censure in his tone. I know it seems that way, Clara acknowledged, but there's something right about this, Uncle. something I've never felt before. Samuel studied her thoughtfully. You're glowing, girl. Haven't seen you look this way since you arrived. He patted her hand. If Nolan makes you happy, then I'm happy for you both. Just remember, to be patient, Clara finished for him. I know, and I will be. But I believe he's ready to move forward, to start living again, rather than just existing. Let's hope so, Samuel said, though there was a hint of concern in his eyes that Clara chose not to question. The days until Saturday passed slowly, each filled with work at the store and thoughts of Brock. Clara found herself wondering what he was doing at various moments. Was he working with his cattle, reading by the fireplace, thinking of her as she was thinking of him? When Saturday finally arrived, Clara dressed with particular care, choosing a dress of deep green that complemented her auburn hair. She arrived at the hotel dining room at the appointed time to find Brock already waiting, looking handsome, if slightly uncomfortable, in a clean suit and string tie. You look beautiful, he said, rising to greet her. Thank you, Clara replied, taking in his appearance with appreciation. You look quite handsome yourself. Dinner was a pleasant affair, the food better than Clara had expected, based on her uncle's lukewarm descriptions. They were halfway through their meal when Sheriff Morgan approached their table, his expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, he said, nodding to Clara before turning to Brock. Got a situation, Nolan. Telegram just came in from Santa Fe. Those rustlers we captured, they had friends. A gang broke them out of jail during transport. Word is they're headed this way. Brock's expression hardened. How many? At least 6, maybe more, the sheriff replied. I'm gathering men for a patrol. Could use your help. Brock glanced at Clara, conflict evident in his eyes. She reached across the table to touch his hand. Go, she said softly. I understand. He nodded, squeezing her hand before rising. Rain check on dinner? He asked, his voice gentle despite the tension in his frame. Of course, Clara assured him. Be careful. Brock nodded to her, exchanged a few more words with the sheriff, and strode from the dining room, his posture already shifted from gentleman to lawman. Sheriff Morgan remained a moment longer. Sorry to spoil your evening, Miss Summers. I wouldn't have asked if it wasn't important. I understand, Clara said again. Just bring him back safely, Sheriff. The older man nodded, his expression softening. We'll do our best. Nolan's not an easy man to kill, as many have discovered to their regret. After they had gone, Clara finished her meal alone, her appetite diminished by worry. Outside, she could hear men gathering in the street, horses being readied. By the time she left the hotel, the posse had already ridden out, leaving the town strangely quiet. Samuel was waiting at the mercantile, having heard the news. They'll be all right, he assured her, though his own concern was evident. Nolan's dealt with worse. That's what everyone keeps saying, Clara said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. It doesn't make it any easier to bear. That night, she slept poorly, waking at every sound. Morning brought no news, nor did the day that followed. By Monday, the town was on edge, windows shuttered, men keeping watch on the rooftops of the main buildings. Clara continued her work at the store, finding solace in routine, though she couldn't help glancing frequently at the door, hoping for Brock's tall figure to appear. It was late Tuesday afternoon when the lookout posted at the edge of town called out a warning. Riders coming in! Looks like our boys! Clara rushed to the door, heart in her throat as she searched the approaching group. She counted 5 men where 8 had ridden out, and for a terrible moment, couldn't find Brock among them. Then the group shifted, and she saw him at the back, supporting another rider who appeared to be wounded. Relief flooded through her, so intense she had to grip the doorframe for support. As the riders drew closer, she could see that Brock himself was unharmed, though exhaustion lined his face and dust covered his clothing. The sheriff dismounted in front of his office, addressing the small crowd that had gathered. Gang's been dealt with, he announced. Lost 2 good men doing it, Pete Wilson and Jim Taylor. A murmur went through the crowd. Clara watched as Brock helped the wounded man down from his horse, supporting him toward the doctor's office. Without hesitation, she followed, knowing she could be of use. Inside, Dr. Jenkins was already preparing his instruments. Bullet wound? He asked briskly as Brock helped the man onto the examination table. Yes, sir, Brock confirmed. Took it in the shoulder yesterday morning. We did what we could on the trail. Miss Summers, the doctor acknowledged Clara as she entered. Good timing. Could use your assistance again. Brock turned, surprise evident on his face when he saw her. Clara, I can help, she said firmly, already rolling up her sleeves. You should get some rest. I'll stay, Brock replied, equally determined. Davis saved my life out there. Least I can do is see him through this. The doctor waved them both into silence. You can both stay if you're going to be useful. Miss Summers, prepare the chloroform. Nolan, I need hot water and clean towels. For the next hour, they worked together to remove the bullet and clean the wound. Davis, a young ranch hand Clara had seen occasionally in town, bore the pain stoically until the chloroform took effect. Throughout the procedure, she was aware of Brock's presence, his hands steady despite his exhaustion, his focus absolute. When it was over, Dr. Jenkins pronounced the prognosis good. He'll need to stay here for a few days, but he should make a full recovery. Brock nodded, relief evident in his posture. Thank you, Doc. Both of you, he added, including Clara in his gratitude. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. Brock stood for a moment, swaying slightly on his feet. When did you last sleep? Clara asked, taking his arm. Don't rightly remember, Brock admitted. Been on the move since Saturday night. Come on, Clara said decisively. Uncle has a spare room behind the store. You're in no condition to ride back to your ranch tonight. Too tired to argue, Brock allowed her to lead him to the mercantile, where Samuel met them at the door. Heard about Wilson and Taylor, he said solemnly. Damn shame. Yes, sir, Brock agreed, his voice rough with fatigue. Good men, both of them. Clara's right, you're staying here tonight, Samuel declared. Got a cot in the back room. Not fancy, but it's clean. Thank you, Brock said simply. Clara helped him to the small room, bringing water for washing and a clean shirt of her uncle's that might fit his broader frame. I'll have some food ready for you in a few minutes, she promised, turning to leave him to his ablutions. Brock caught her hand. Clara, he said softly, thank you for understanding, for helping Davis, for everything. She squeezed his hand gently. Get cleaned up. We'll talk when you've had some food. When she returned with a tray of stew, bread, and coffee, Brock had washed away the worst of the trail dust and changed into the borrowed shirt. He sat on the edge of the cot, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion, but his eyes more alert. That smells amazing, he said, as she set the tray beside him. Eat, Clara encouraged, taking a seat on the room's only chair. Then you can tell me what happened, if you want to. Brock ate with the efficiency of a man accustomed to taking nourishment where he could find it. When he'd finished, he set the tray aside and ran a hand through his still damp hair. Gang caught up to us near the territorial border, he began. Had us outnumbered. Sheriff sent Wilson and me to circle around. Try to flank them. We were nearly in position when they spotted us. His voice grew distant, reliving the moment. Wilson took the first bullet, died before he hit the ground. I managed to get under cover, but they had me pinned down. Clara listened in silence, understanding his need to talk through the events. Davis saw what was happening, broke from cover to draw their fire, took a bullet meant for me, but it gave me the opening I needed. Brock's hands clenched into fists. Got 3 of them before the rest broke and ran. We tracked them through the night, caught up yesterday morning. That's when the real fight started. And you're sure they're all... Clara couldn't bring herself to finish the question. Dead or captured, Brock confirmed grimly. They won't be threatening Tucumcari again. Clara rose, moving to sit beside him on the cot. I was so worried, she admitted, taking his hand. When I saw you riding in, I thought my heart might stop. Brock's arm came around her, drawing her close. Thought about you the whole time, he confessed, his voice low. Kept thinking I had to make it back, had to see you again. Clara turned her face up to his, her hand coming to rest against his cheek. I'm glad you did. His kiss was different this time, still gentle, but with an urgency born of the knowledge that life was fragile, that moments like these were precious. Clara responded in kind, her fingers threading through his hair as she pressed closer. When they finally separated, Brock's breathing was uneven, his eyes dark with emotion and exhaustion in equal measure. Clara, he began, then hesitated. You need to rest, she said firmly, though reluctantly. We have time for talking tomorrow. Brock nodded, the events of the past days finally catching up to him. Stay? He asked simply. Just until I fall asleep? Clara knew she should refuse, that propriety demanded it, but found she couldn't deny him this simple comfort. All right, she agreed, shifting so he could lie down on the narrow cot. She sat beside him, her hand finding his as his eyes drifted closed. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep, the lines of tension easing from his face. Clara remained a while longer, watching over him, before quietly slipping from the room. Samuel was waiting in the front of the store, a knowing look in his eyes. He'll be all right, he assured her. Nolan survived worse than this. So everyone keeps telling me, Clara said, managing a small smile. But I'd rather he didn't have to keep proving it. The next morning, Clara rose early, checking on their guest before opening the store. Brock was still deeply asleep, his exhaustion evident in the way he hadn't moved from the position she'd left him in. She closed the door quietly, leaving him to rest. It was mid-morning when he finally emerged, looking more like himself, despite the borrowed shirt that stretched across his shoulders. Morning, he greeted them, his voice still rough with sleep. Good morning, Clara replied warmly. There's coffee and breakfast if you're hungry. Starving, Brock admitted with a small smile. Then I should head back to my ranch. Been away too long as it is. After breakfast, he prepared to leave, retrieving his horse from the livery where it had been stabled overnight. Clara walked with him to the edge of town, aware of curious eyes watching their progress. When will I see you again? She asked, as they stopped beside his horse. Give me a couple of days to set things right at the ranch, Brock said. Then I'll be back. Maybe we can try that dinner again? Clara nodded, reluctant to see him go, but understanding his responsibilities. I'll be here. Brock glanced around, noting the observers, then apparently decided he didn't care what they thought. He pulled Clara into his arms, his kiss brief but tender. Thank you, he said softly, for everything. Be safe, she replied, stepping back as he mounted his horse. She watched until he disappeared from view, a mixture of emotions swirling within her, concern for his well-being, joy at what was growing between them, and a quiet determination that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. True to his word, Brock returned to town 3 days later. The dinner they had missed was finally enjoyed, followed by an evening walk through the quiet streets of Tucumcari. Over the weeks that followed, a pattern emerged. Brock would come to town every few days, sometimes staying for dinner, other times just long enough to see Clara and perhaps help with some task at the store.